You have awakened, but instead of feeling powerful, you feel hollow. Where once ambition burned, now only silence remains. The career ladder you once climbed seems absurd. The pleasures you once chased feel tasteless. The routines that once gave you momentum now seem like shadows of a self you no longer recognize. Do you not ask yourself what happened to the fire that once drove you? Why, after gaining vision, do you feel paralyzed? This absence of motivation is not laziness. It is the inevitable death of illusions. Before awakening, you were fueled by masks, by roles, by the need to prove yourself to a world built on appearances. But once you awaken, those masks collapse. What once moved you now reveals itself as hollow. And so you stand in the void between two lives, the old one that no longer fits and the new one not yet born. Ask yourself how many of your old goals were truly yours and how many were borrowed dreams. How much of your striving was survival, not purpose? How many nights did you exhaust yourself chasing approval only to feel emptier each morning? And now, without those illusions, do you not feel exposed, naked before the truth that much of your life was performance? Jung's insight is merciless. The false self must die before the true self can live. Your lack of motivation is not failure. It is initiation. You are not broken. You are being stripped of lies. The question is whether you will endure this silence long enough for authentic purpose to emerge. From childhood, you were taught that drive equaled worth. You were praised when you performed, rewarded when you achieved, accepted when you conformed. And so your life became a relentless script of striving, grades, promotions, possessions, approval. But did you ever pause to ask, whose script were you following? How many of those goals reflected your soul, and how many were simply masks handed down by family, society, culture? Spiritual awakening shatters this scaffolding. One day, what once seemed urgent loses all weight. The job title that once defined you feels meaningless. The social circles that once entertained you feel hollow. The ambitions that once gave you direction now seem like illusions you can no longer serve. You wake up to the realization that so much of your motivation was never yours. It was borrowed, imposed, inherited. Is it any wonder that after awakening, the fire goes out? Jung warned that the persona, the mask you wear for the world, eventually collapses. And when it does, the energy that once fueled your striving dissolves too. What you are left with is silence, emptiness, paralysis. You call it no motivation, but in truth, it is the dismantling of false life. Have you not noticed that your soul refuses to move toward what once drained you? That your body resists returning to cycles of performance and pretense? This stage is not weakness, it is initiation. You are caught between death and rebirth, between the collapse of illusion and the birth of authenticity. The old engines no longer run, and the new ones have not yet been built. It feels terrifying, even shameful, to have no drive in a world obsessed with productivity. But is it not more dangerous to keep forcing yourself into illusions, pretending you still believe in what your soul has already left behind? The context is, merciless lack of motivation after awakening is not a failure of willpower, it is proof that false desires are dying. The question is whether you will numb yourself back into illusion or endure the silence until real purpose emerges. To understand why your motivation collapses after spiritual awakening, you must look through Jung's lens. He showed that your psyche is not a flat surface, but a layered structure, masks, wounds, shadows, and a deeper self. When awakening tears away the surface, the structures underneath demand recognition. Each one explains why you feel paralyzed, why old ambitions no longer move you, and why the new ones have not yet formed. The persona collapse of the mask. Your persona was the identity you wore to gain approval: hard worker, achiever, loyal child, social success. Motivation before awakening often flowed from this mask. You strove not because your soul longed to, but because the mask required fuel. Promotions, praise, recognition, these were not goals, but oxygen for the persona. But awakening strips the mask. Once you glimpse that your value is not tied to external roles, the persona crumbles. And with its collapse, the drive it manufactured dies as well. Have you not noticed how exhausting it feels now to perform what once seemed effortless? How even small pretenses drain you, while silence feels like relief? The shadow confrontation with what was denied. Your motivation once depended on denial. You silenced parts of yourself, anger, laziness, longing for rest, because they threatened your identity as driven or successful. But awakening floods the shadow with light. Suddenly, the parts you buried rise and demand attention. You feel tired, not because you are weak, but because your body insists on rest you long denied. You resist striving, not because you are lazy, but because you refuse to numb yourself again. Ask yourself how much of your old motivation was simply repression disguised as discipline. And what if the fatigue you feel now is your shadow calling you to honesty? Complexes, the old wounds that fueled striving. Much of your drive came from unresolved wounds. Perhaps guilt from childhood whispered that you were never enough, so you worked harder. Perhaps abandonment left you terrified of being unwanted, so you overachieved to stay safe. Perhaps shame drove you to prove your worth again and again. These complexes became engines of motivation, but awakening disarms them. You see through the lie that more work will heal old wounds, that more success will erase shame. And when those complexes lose their power, the fuel of striving disappears. Do you not see that what you call lost motivation is in fact liberation from wounds that once enslaved you? Projection, the collapse of false goals. You once projected salvation onto external achievements. You believed the next job, the next partner, the next milestone would complete you. Each goal carried the illusion of redemption. But awakening collapses these projections. You see that no external prize can give you wholeness. What once glittered now looks hollow. And so the motivation to chase it evaporates. Is it not revealing how quickly old dreams lose their shine after you awaken? How quickly you realize that what you longed for was never the thing itself, but the self you hoped it would deliver? The self-individuation as new orientation. At the center of Jung's thought is the self, the wholeness you are called to embody. Motivation after awakening cannot come from persona, shadow repression, wounded complexes, or false projections. It must come from alignment with the self. This is why you feel nothing now. The old drives have died, but the self has not yet anchored new ones. You are between identities, between energies, between lives. This silence is terrifying, but it is also sacred. The self waits to guide you, but only when you stop reaching backward. Ask yourself, will you numb yourself by forcing old goals, or will you endure the stillness until authentic purpose emerges? The structure of paralysis. Taken together, these foundations explain why you feel no motivation after awakening. The persona collapses, leaving no role to fuel. The shadow rises, demanding honesty instead of repression. Complexes lose power, dissolving the engines of guilt and shame. Projections collapse, stripping external goals of meaning. And the self waits silently, calling you toward a deeper life not yet visible. Is it any wonder you feel paralyzed? You are standing in the ashes of your old engines, waiting for the fire of authenticity to ignite. So the piercing questions confront you. How much of your old motivation was ever truly yours? How much of your energy was fueled by guilt, shame, fear, or pretense? How many of your ambitions were masks you wore for survival, not longings born of your soul? And most urgently, will you run back to illusions for the comfort of momentum? Or will you accept this paralysis as initiation into the self? Because Jung's insight is severe but liberating. The death of false motivation is not weakness. It is the necessary passage into wholeness. Until you face this truth, you will mistake apathy for failure. But once you embrace it, you will see it for what it is, the sacred pause before rebirth, the silence that clears space for authentic purpose to emerge. Abstractions explain the structure of your paralysis, but it is in daily life that you most clearly see how motivation dies after awakening. You do not live theory, you live examples. Each sphere of your existence becomes a stage where illusions collapse and silence takes their place. If you examine them closely, you will see a consistent pattern. What once seemed urgent no longer moves you. And this absence of movement is not decay, it is revelation. Workplace. The hollow stage of ambition. You used to wake with urgency, ready to chase deadlines, promotions, recognition. Each task carried the promise of progress. But after awakening, the entire structure feels absurd. Meetings echo with emptiness. Deadlines feel contrived. Promotions no longer tempt you because you see them for what they are, masks of validation, not sources of meaning. Have you not noticed how exhausting it feels to play along with ambition you no longer believe in? How many mornings do you wake with dread, sensing that climbing ladders built on illusion is no longer possible? You are not lazy. You are resisting a script your soul has already outgrown. Relationships, the collapse of social performance. You once had energy for small talk, for keeping up appearances, for maintaining connections that were convenient but shallow. You laughed at jokes you did not find funny, agreed with opinions you did not share, stayed in circles that drained you. But after awakening, you find it almost impossible. Parties feel suffocating, conversations feel scripted. Friendships once maintained by habit now dissolve in silence. Do you not wonder why you feel so drained by interactions that once cost you nothing? It is because you can no longer collude in roles that dishonor your soul. Without performance, the motivation to maintain shallow ties dies. Family, the weight of inherited scripts. You were raised with expectations: achieve, marry, settle, serve. These roles carried implicit promises. If you obey, you will belong. But after awakening, you see them for what they are: masks, passed down by generations too afraid to question them. You try to meet these expectations, but the weight crushes you. You feel no motivation to pursue the paths they demand because they are not yours. Have you not felt the subtle guilt of disappointing family by refusing the life they scripted? And have you not also felt the quiet relief of admitting you cannot live a destiny that is not your own? Motivation collapses here because borrowed lives cannot sustain true energy. Daily life, the death of old pleasures. Even small habits shift. The television shows that once entertained you now feel shallow. The hobbies that once distracted you now bore you. The routines that once gave comfort now feel like chains. Food shopping, entertainment, what once offered satisfaction now leaves you restless. Do you not sometimes wonder if you have lost the ability to feel joy? But it is not joy that has died. It is appetite for illusions. What satisfied you before awakening cannot satisfy you after because your soul demands something real. The collapse of motivation in daily life is the clearest proof that the old fuel has burned out. The common thread, collapse of false engines across work relationships, family, and daily habits, the pattern is merciless. The engines that once drove you, ambition, performance, obedience, distraction, have all stalled. You cannot make them run again, no matter how hard you try. Have you not noticed how much energy it costs simply to pretend enthusiasm you do not feel? And do you not sense that the apathy you experience is not a flaw, but the truth? The truth that you can no longer live divided, chasing what you do not believe in, playing roles that are no longer yours. The silent terror living between two worlds. In each of these examples, what terrifies you is not only the absence of motivation, but the silence that replaces it. You feel estranged from your old life, but not yet rooted in a new one. You fear that the emptiness will last forever. How often have you whispered to yourself, "What if I never care again? What if the fire never returns?" And yet, do you not also sense that the fire you seek cannot be the old fire? That what will return must be born of the self, not of masks, wounds, or borrowed goals. So the piercing questions rise. How much longer will you force yourself into ambitions that suffocate you? How many more years will you try to sustain relationships built only on performance? How often will you betray yourself for the comfort of family scripts that do not belong to you? How much longer will you pretend joy in pleasures that no longer touch your soul? Because Jung's warning is merciless. When the persona collapses, the old motivations collapse with it. To mourn them is natural, but to try to resurrect them is to betray yourself. The typical examples of your life reveal the same truth. You are not lazy, you are not broken, you are not failing, you are shedding. And what you shed is not life, but illusion. The death of motivation is the death of falsehood, and in its place something silent and slow is growing. You are being emptied, not to be destroyed, but to be prepared. The question is whether you will endure the silence until the self fills it, or flee back into illusions for the comfort of momentum. Your examples speak clearly. The only question that remains is whether you will listen. Your lack of motivation after awakening may look like apathy from the outside, but beneath it runs a complex web of psychological, emotional, behavioral, ethical, and existential dynamics. Jung's insights reveal that this is not weakness, but structure, the necessary unraveling of old engines before new life emerges. To see the mechanism clearly is to stop blaming yourself and begin recognizing the truth. You are not failing, you are transforming. Psychological, the collapse of the persona. For most of your life, your energy was tied to the persona, the mask you wore to secure acceptance. You studied, worked, achieved, performed, not always because you wanted to, but because the persona demanded it. Once awakened, that mask collapses. Without it, the energy that once fueled your striving disappears. Have you not noticed how exhausting it feels to push yourself back into roles that no longer fit? Why does your body resist, your mind stall, your heart refuse to move? It is because your psyche will no longer lend energy to falsehood. The collapse of motivation is the collapse of the mask itself. Emotional, the withdrawal of external validation. Your old drive was not powered only by inner desire. It was fed by approval, praise, recognition. Each well done, each nod of acceptance gave you fuel. After awakening, those rewards lose meaning. You see them as hollow, conditional, manipulative, and so the fire dies. Do you not feel numb when others praise what once thrilled you? Do you not sense the futility of striving for applause that no longer touches your soul? The absence of motivation is not emotional emptiness, but the refusal to live on borrowed validation. Behavioral, the death of old routines. Habits once carried you forward. Wake early, work hard, repeat. Even if your heart resisted, the routine itself pushed you. But after awakening, the gears jam. You skip tasks, delay projects, abandon habits. This frightens you, yet it is revealing. How many of your routines existed not because they nourished you, but because they numbed you? How many productive days were merely performances in disguise? The death of routine exposes how much of your momentum was sustained by inertia, not authenticity. Motivation collapses when you can no longer tolerate movement without meaning. Ethical. The refusal to collude with falsehood. At the core of awakening is an ethical rupture. You refuse to keep playing games you know are hollow. You can no longer flatter for gain, strive for shallow rewards, or collude with systems that corrode truth. This refusal feels like paralysis, but it is integrity. Have you not noticed how your no rises now, where once you said yes automatically? How silence feels cleaner than participation? How the absence of drive is actually fidelity to what you now see clearly? Apathy is not lack of morality. It is morality refusing to collude. Existential, the void between death and rebirth. Perhaps the most haunting mechanism is existential. Awakening dismantles the scaffolding of your old life, but the new structure is not yet built. You live in the in-between, where false engines have died, but authentic engines have not yet appeared. This is why your days feel like drifting. Do you not feel caught between worlds, unable to go back yet, unable to move forward? Do you not fear that the emptiness will last forever? And yet, is this not the very threshold Jung described, where the false self dies so the true self can emerge? Lack of motivation here is not final, it is liminal. The interlocking cycle. These mechanisms do not stand alone, they interlock. Persona collapse strips psychological fuel. Without external validation, emotional engines fail. Without those engines, routines disintegrate. Without routines, ethical clarity forces withdrawal. And beneath it all, the existential void expands. You call it no motivation, but in truth, it is a carefully structured unraveling. Your psyche dismantles the old piece by piece, so that the new may one day emerge. The severe clarity. So the piercing questions press against you. How much of your past motivation was ever truly yours? How much of your energy was stolen by roles, expectations, and illusions? How long will you keep calling paralysis failure when it is proof that your soul refuses to move backward? And most urgently, will you endure this silence long enough to be reborn? Or will you force yourself back into masks that no longer fit? Because Jung's warning is merciless. What you collude with will enslave you, but what you withdraw from will collapse. Your lack of motivation is not a flaw to be fixed, but a passage to be endured. You are not weak, you are in transition. You are not failing, you are being emptied of lies. And this emptiness, terrifying as it feels, is the only ground upon which the self can rise. The mechanism is severe but liberating. The death of false engines clears space for authentic fire. Your task is not to resurrect the old, but to wait for the new. Will you betray yourself by forcing momentum that no longer belongs? Or will you honor this paralysis as the proof that your soul has begun to lead? You know now that the absence of motivation after awakening is not laziness, but initiation. Yet knowledge alone is not enough. You must embody it. To live through this liminal stage requires practices that protect your soul from collapse into despair or regression. These practices are not about reigniting the old fire, but about cultivating the space where authentic fire can emerge. The work is severe, but without it, you risk slipping back into illusions. Observation. Seeing where illusion once fueled you. Begin by observing the exact places where apathy strikes. Is it in work that once consumed you? In social rituals that once drained you? In ambitions that once defined you? Do not condemn yourself for indifference. See it as revelation. Your lack of drive is a compass pointing to what was never yours. Ask yourself daily, what tasks leave me numb, and what small acts feel clean, even if they are quiet? Where do I feel resistance because my soul refuses to comply? Observation is not passive, it is the first act of discernment. Boundaries. Refusing to re-enter false pursuits. The greatest danger at this stage is the temptation to force yourself back into old engines. You may feel shame for not achieving, fear for not producing, guilt for not meeting expectations. But if you yield, you will betray the awakening. Boundaries protect you here, not just with others, but with yourself. You must be able to say, "I will not return to illusions for the comfort of momentum." Have you not noticed how exhausting it is to pretend enthusiasm? Why would you chain yourself again to masks your soul has already burned? Boundaries preserve the void until truth can fill it. Shadow work, grieving the death of old drives. It is not enough to reject illusions. You must grieve them. For years you were defined by ambition, performance, approval. To lose them feels like death. And it is. Jung warns what you repress will enslave you. If you do not allow yourself to mourn, your old drives will haunt you in secret, tempting you back into cycles you thought you left behind. So let yourself weep, let yourself rage, let yourself admit, "I built a life on roles that were never mine." Have you given yourself permission to grieve not only the abuse of the old engines, but the comfort they provided? Only by grieving can you release them cleanly. Reframe seeing emptiness as purification. What if your lack of motivation is not evidence of failure, but proof of fidelity? You are no longer willing to betray yourself for applause. You are no longer capable of striving for what you do not believe. What feels like paralysis is in fact purification. You are being stripped of false desire. Ask yourself, is this not better than burning energy on illusions? Is emptiness not cleaner than corruption? To reframe your apathy as purification is to honor the silence as sacred ground. Daily fidelity, small acts of authenticity. You cannot leap from emptiness to fullness overnight. Motivation will not return in grand fire. It will flicker first as sparks in small faithful acts. One act each day that aligns with truth is enough. It may be writing a page, walking in silence, saying no to a request that drains you, or saying yes to a rest you once denied. The measure is not productivity, but fidelity. Each act builds strength. Each refusal to betray yourself deepens integrity. Have you not already felt how a single authentic choice nourishes you more than 100 false achievements? This is the soil from which authentic purpose grows. Relational discernment testing, who remains when you change your lack of motivation, will not only test you, it will test your relationships. Some will pressure you back into performance. Why don't you care anymore? Why are you so lazy? Others will respect your silence, even if they don't understand it. Observe carefully. Ask yourself, who thrives only when I perform, and who remains when I withdraw? Who accuses me when I no longer play the game, and who honors me as I am? This discernment is brutal but necessary. Relationships sustained by false roles cannot survive your awakening, and that collapse is revelation. Service, giving without collusion. Your apathy does not mean you cannot give, it means you cannot give falsely. Service is still possible, but it must be clean. Where today can you give without losing yourself? Where can you help without erasing your boundaries? Where can your presence illuminate without being consumed? This new way of giving is sacred because it is free. It flows not from guilt or compulsion, but from joy and clarity. Have you not noticed how even the smallest authentic act of service feels more alive than years of compulsive sacrifice? The severe patience, enduring the silence. Perhaps the hardest application is patience. You want clarity now, you want purpose now, but the self does not move on demand. Its fire grows slowly beneath the ashes of old illusions. You must endure the silence, the emptiness, the sense of drift. Will you rush back to illusions just to escape the discomfort? Or will you endure long enough to let authentic purpose arise? Patience here is severe, but it is fidelity to truth. To break it is to regress. To keep it is to be remade. The living choice. So the piercing questions confront you. Will you keep forcing old engines for the comfort of momentum, or will you accept emptiness as purification? Will you call yourself broken because you cannot strive, or will you honor your soul for refusing to betray itself? Will you collapse into despair at the silence, or will you endure it until authentic fire returns? Because Jung's insight is merciless. What you repress will enslave you, but what you honor will transform you. Your lack of motivation after awakening is not decay. It is the sacred pause between death and rebirth. Your task is not to force, but to wait, not to strive, but to endure, not to resurrect the old, but to prepare for the new. Each act of observation, each boundary drawn, each shadow grieved, each fidelity practiced brings you closer to the self. And the self is the only source of motivation that does not collapse. Would you like me to now close the sequence with Part 7, the conclusion and CTA around 350 words to seal the flow? You stand now at the threshold between two lives, the old one that collapsed under illusion and the new one not yet revealed. Your lack of motivation is not a flaw. It is the clearest sign that false drives have died. What feels like paralysis is the sacred stillness before rebirth. Will you keep forcing yourself into scripts your soul has already rejected, or will you endure the silence until your true calling emerges? Will you chase momentum for the sake of appearances, or will you wait for direction rooted in the self? Jung's warning presses here with merciless clarity. What you repress will enslave you, but what you integrate will set you free. The apathy you feel is not absence of life. It is life refusing to be wasted on illusion. It is your soul drawing boundaries against corruption, demanding fidelity instead of performance. Have you not noticed that what drains you most is not stillness, but pretense? And that even in emptiness, there is a strange honesty that feels cleaner than the busiest lie. The task before you is severe but liberating. Stop mistaking emptiness for failure and start honoring it as initiation. Stop apologizing for your lack of drive and start protecting it as the silence where the self prepares new fire. Ask yourself daily, will I betray myself for the comfort of old engines, or will I remain faithful to the pause until authentic purpose arises? Because the truth is stark, spiritual awakening dismantles before it builds. Your no motivation is not the end, it is the passage. Endure it with patience, guard it with fidelity, and allow it to transform you. So the call is clear today. Refuse to resurrect an old fire that no longer belongs. Instead, choose one act that aligns with authenticity, however small. This is how you honor the silence. This is how you prepare for rebirth. And when the self ignites the fire, the returns will not burn out, for it will be yours.